Joining me now is Dan Mitchell. He is the chairman for the Center for Freedom and Prosperity. Easy for me to say. Dan, I think what we're doing right now is absolute insanity. I've never seen a nation line up its own economy on the side of a ditch before and shoot it in the back of the head. Nevertheless, that is what we're doing. You, however, are much more educated than I am. Please tell me I'm wrong and this is all just fine.
Well, I'm definitely not educated on the disease and epidemiology and things like that. But I will agree with you that our economy is taking a terrible blow. What we don't know, though, is what would happen if we had just let everyone continue to operate as normal. I suspect a lot of people would have stayed home, even quit their jobs, because they would be afraid of the virus. And to be honest, there are so many things we don't know about the virus. How many people have already been infected? How many people are asymptomatic? How many people have been cured? How many people had it and never knew about it? So we're in the middle of a great unknown, and there are unknowns that we don't even know we don't know.
Well, what do we know, though? You're right. There are a bunch of things we don't know. We don't know how bad it would have been. We don't know if we made it worse. We don't know if we made it better. We don't know a lot of things. What we do know is we have 17 million Americans already on unemployment. That means the number's undoubtedly over 20 million if you take into account most people can't even get through or didn't qualify for it to begin with. It is only April 10th, so we're easily heading towards 30, 40 million. I don't care what anybody says to me. What do we do from there? Let's assume, and be really nice, let's assume we have our arms wrapped around the virus from there, and we need to slowly start opening things back up. How do we do that?
The frustrating thing about what's happened in Washington is that they've spent a couple of $1 trillion, and probably the biggest bang for the buck that we could get is if we had put money into testing. Find out who's had it, who's been cured. And by the way, don't have the FDA and the CDC involved at all, because they've really showered themselves with shame with their bureaucratic rules and hindering the ability of private labs and universities to get involved. But with all that money we spent, some of it should have been targeted not to the FDA and CDC, but to private labs and other vehicles for getting mass testing. Because once people know, and once not only individuals know, but once society knows the extent of the virus, we'll be able to make a lot more educated decisions. Because you're exactly right. We can't keep going like this for too long with the economy, because sooner or later, the government's going to run out of an ability to borrow money. And oh, by the way, an economy that is shut down imposes its own toll in terms of lost lives, depression, suicide. And by the way, there's also a long-run relationship between the wealth of a society, the prosperity of a society, and longevity and lifespans. So there are all these trade-offs we need to be making. And unfortunately, the way Congress is approaching it, and certainly the way the bureaucracies are approaching it, we're just not getting the information we need as quickly as we need it.
I'm concerned about the freedom of our economy, greatly concerned going forward. Obviously, we need a society that is light on its feet, especially now. We don't need government burdens. We already have way too many during this lockdown, but that's another story. I'm worried coming out of this, what we'll need is freedom, and what we're going to have is more government guidance, and that's really going to hold us back.
That's a very, very serious concern. As Congress passes these multi-trillion-dollar packages, as the Federal Reserve starts intervening in the economy and deciding what businesses to keep afloat and what ones to let go, in effect, we're getting an indirect form of central planning in our economy. And we know from global history that's just not a good recipe. Now, if we can cross our fingers and hope that once the crisis goes away, all these interventions can be unwound, then that would be great. In effect, we would have sacrificed our economy to keep a certain number of people alive. And okay, different people can have different ideas of what the trade-off should be on that, but there's something noble and admirable about that. We're all willing to suffer in order to keep X thousands of people from premature deaths. But if we wind up, as you indicated, with some long-term increase in the burden of government in terms of regulation, red tape, intervention, new mandates, government control, or at least significant intervention in capital markets, we could wind up being a lot poorer at the end of the day as a result of this crisis.
Dan, tell me why we can't keep printing money. I think people get confused on this. People instinctively know that we can't, but they seemingly never run out of it. They just hand out another 2 trillion here and another 2 trillion there, and people genuinely feel like the number's so big that we could just do this forever. Why can't we do this forever?
I don't think anybody has any concept of what $2 trillion is, or by the time it's all over with, probably 4 or 5 trillion. That's just an unimaginable number. We don't even know what a billion is. We might have a vague concept of what a million is. Now, there is a theory out there. Bernie Sanders ran on it, called modern monetary theory. The idea is you don't even need to tax people. Just print money every time the government wants to buy something. Well, we see Venezuela, we see Argentina, we saw Zimbabwe last decade. That's a recipe for disaster. So let's set aside the modern monetary theory, because that's a bit of a cranky idea. And let's simply consider the fact that the United States government is considered the safe haven for the world's investors. So as much as I don't like lots of government debt, frankly, we could probably borrow $10 trillion more and there would still be willing buyers for it, especially in an environment where investors think that companies may go bankrupt. So there's the so-called flight to safety, as individual investors, institutional investors are happy to buy lots of U.S. government debt simply because they figure at the end of the day, that's going to be the last thing to go bankrupt in our society. But does that mean it's a good idea? Of course it doesn't mean it's a good idea to have endless amounts of debt. Why do we think Greece and Italy got into the mess that they're in right now? Because for decades and decades and decades, they were doing what we're doing today. Now, we're a lot stronger than Italy and Greece. We can probably continue doing these policies for 10, 20, 30 more years, but sooner or later, you're in a hole, you keep digging, eventually you're not able to climb out of it.
Dan Mitchell, that was extremely educational. Thank you for giving us some time today, sir.
Well, thank you.